So I'm going to start by going to Bitbucket, and I'm going to want to get started for free. So my email address, I'm just going to use my student email address. Kind of looks like a boat. Yay. Okay, so I'm going to check my email. So I'm going to go to Fox Valley Tech. Okay, so I'm going to sign in as my student account. Okay, first time I've ever signed into my student account. I'm going to verify my email address. Okay, now that we have our Bitbucket account created, I actually logged onto my virtual machine and logged into Bitbucket here. The main reason I wanted to do it on my virtual machine is because we're going to create a repository, and it is going to have a URL, and I don't want to have to type that in. So I'm just logging into my Bitbucket account, and underneath the repositories, and actually you don't even have to go there, there's a create button here. I'm going to click on the create. And what I want to do is I want to create a new repository that has the same name as our project. So I'm just going to call this thing PHP class. And this is going to be where we're going to be storing all of the changes that we're making as we're writing code. So I'm just going to create this repository. The big thing is that we're using the Git protocol. And that it's a private repository. And that's the nice thing with Bitbucket is there's unlimited private repositories. So I'm just going to create this. And then this is the URL. So I'm just going to click the copy button here. It's going to copy a little bit more than I need, but that's okay. I'll delete it later. So I'm going to open up my PHP Storm. And I guess it's important to kind of understand the structure here a little bit. We've got our local file system here. All right, so this PHP class, if I go into my documents, I've got a folder here. Inside the folder has actual physical files. All right, those are the same files that are being represented on the left side of the screen. All right, I can right click and I can deploy those files. And when I go to my deployment and upload to web server, it basically takes that file and then it moves it over to our Ubuntu server that we already set up. And so that is the remote server. So in the real world, that would be our public website. It's either going to be a GoDaddy or InMotion hosting or something like that. So we're going to have like some Rackspace or Azure. We're going to have some web presence All right, so that is going to be this. All right, so that's the remote. So typically what happens is you grab a file and you start working on it locally. You'll save it, you'll test it, and there may be more complicated deployment. Sometimes they have like a dev server. On my last team, that's what we had. We did our code, we pushed it to a dev server, so we could look at it, get customer sign off. And actually there was the staging, so then we'd move it from dev to staging, and then the customer would look at it on the staging system. They would approve it, and then it would get moved over to production. But the big thing is there's just a place that people can view it on the web. All right, that's the remote. Now, as we're writing our code, we're making changes, we're saving things, and all those incremental changes are not being saved. We work on it here, we move it here. When we move it from our local to our remote, it blows away all of the changes on the remote and puts the new file that we put up there. So that's where version control becomes extremely important. So when we're introducing Bitbucket here, I have the ability to make changes and save those changes, and all those changes get put into Bitbucket, and it will store all of the incremental changes as I go along. So that's what version control is. Now, the thing that's really nice with things like Bitbucket and GitHub and whatever version control you're using, when you start working on a team, that's when it gets really important, because now you have multiple people making changes to one website or one project, and you need to keep everything synchronized, and that becomes really complex. So that's what I want to talk about. All right, so so within our project, we've got the source, which is where it's going to be, all the source code's going to be in there. Commits. Every time anybody makes any change, the commit gets put into the commits. You have branches. Now, typically you have one big project you're working on, and it has individual features. And different people may be working on different features, like create an account or update profile picture or a search feature. All of those features are typically branches. You branch off and you work on it, and then you'll merge it back in. Now, because we're individual developers, typically I would normally just commit every time I'm making a change that I want to have persisted. People will do pull requests, so I'll kind of work through all of this, and then underneath settings, at least for Bitbucket, the other thing that's kind of important to note, if for whatever reason something gets messed up on your account and you just want to like start over, underneath settings, if you scroll way down to the bottom, you can delete the repo. You don't have to if everything's working good, but if there's ever an issue. So at this point, I've got my repo set up, and I want to get everything hooked into PHP Storm. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to just upload everything to the web server. All right, so I'm going to do my deployment and upload to web server. So what I'm doing is I'm just making a remote copy of everything just in case something gets messed up here. I'm going to show you the way I do it. I think it's probably the easiest way of doing it. I'm just going to minimize. I don't know if it's the easiest way. It's the way that I do it. So I'm going to go to my documents, and I have that PHP class. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename it to PHP class 2. So I'm just getting it out of the way for right now. The way that I normally like to do my version control is under VCS, that's the version control system. I like to always check out from the server. So like in the real world, when a project is starting, one of the first things that happens is you set up the repo, you get everybody connected up to version control, and then you start writing code. All right, we started a little bit early, just kind of making sure our system was set up, which isn't that uncommon either. That's why I would copy this, because I've done this before and run into problems. So the first thing I want to do is I want to check out from get. All right, so what we're going to do is kind of hook everything up. And I'm going to paste that URL in that I copied previously. Now it's not a valid URL. If I scroll all the way to the left-hand side, I see it says get and clone. You can do get from a command line, and that's not what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to click on the clone button, and we don't have Git installed. All right, so I need to install the Git application. So I'm going to go to the download, and I'm running on a Windows virtual machine, and it automatically started, so that's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through the installer. So there's a lot of options while you're installing Git. To be honest with you, I always use the defaults, and it works perfectly for me for everything that I do. So I'm going to go with all of the defaults. Okay, so then the next thing I want to do here is I need to configure PHP Storm to know where this is. I'm actually going to go to my configure here. If you closed this, I'll just do that in case you did. If you click configure, you're good. This is the way I work with my settings. If you go to your settings, it feels like they've got a ton of settings in here, and I have a hard time finding stuff. They do have the search box, which is nice. I'm just going to search for Git, and it's important to do Git with an I. And then I'm not using GitHub. I'm actually using a competitor to GitHub, which is Bitbucket. So if I click on Git, it needs to find my Git, and auto detecting did not find it, so I need to click on the ellipsis. And I want to go to my program files. So I'm going to scroll this all the way up to the top. I don't want my program files, that's the x86. I'm going to go into the actual program files. I see Git. Inside Git there's a bin directory, which is short for binary compiled code. I'm going to use git.exe. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to test that. It looks like everything's good. I'm going to say OK. Okay, so now we're all configured. So I got to do this again. So I'm going to go to my version control. I'm going to check out. Well, okay, so I'm going to check out using Git. Now the directory, I think because we tried it and we failed, if I go to my documents, I see this PHP class with nothing in it. So I'm going to just delete that, because not the PHP class 2, just the PHP class. I'm going to delete that one. PHP 2 is our copy, so I'm keeping that around for now. Okay, so the URL, I'm going to paste that URL in, and I'm going to scroll all the way over to the left-hand side again and get rid of the space clone Git. And then at this point, I'm going to clone it. So if everything works well, it's going to go out to Bitbucket. All right, I got to type in my password. I'm going to log in. And let's say yes. I'll say OK. So what it's going to do is it's going to go to Bitbucket and pull down our Git repository. So I'm going to close PHP Storm. So now I've got two folders. I've got my PHP class and I've got my PHP class 2. So I'm going to go inside my PHP class and I'm just going to delete everything inside of it. So that .idea is PHP Storm configuration files. So I'm going to go inside my PHP class 2. I'm going to copy everything inside of it. If it was a bigger project, obviously this would be a little bit more beneficial. But we've done quite a bit of work here. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste that inside this class, or inside this PHP class folder. Okay, so I took all of the files in the PHP2 and moved them inside the PHP. So I'm going to actually just delete my PHP class 2 now. And say okay. So it's kind of a little hokey, but what we did basically is we took our repo here. We took this repo and we used the get.exe to basically take the folder that is on Bitbucket and basically cloned it down to our machine. So it created that folder for us. Now the problem was that folder was completely empty. It didn't have any configuration, didn't have anything we needed. So it pulled down an empty folder for us. So then we took our copied folder, put everything we needed inside there. So now if we open up PHP Storm, this is where I keep my fingers crossed. If everything worked well, then it will be able to pull the old configuration files and then still have like our remote server, our local folder, and everything else. Okay, so I'm going to open this up. So I've got my local files, which is good. I've got my remote files, which is good. And it should be connected up to version. So at this point, I see a red test.php. So what I want to do is I want to add this to our version control. All right, so I'm going to just do a really quick crash course on how this works. If I right click on the file, I have a Git menu. And what I want to do is I want to add this file to the Git menu. Now if I click off of it, now it's green. So now it's under version control. So what I want to do is I want to add this file to our Bitbucket. Just because I added it to the version control, if I go back over here and like go to our project here, so underneath source, there's nothing in here. All right, so just adding it is adding it to like down here, this version control. If I go under default, I can see that's in here. So, and actually this is maybe an easier place to do some work, but for right now I'm just going to show you through the menu here. After adding a file, we have things called commits and pushes. So committing is taking a file and then putting a message in there. So I'm just going to say adding file for the first time. So you can actually queue up a bunch of files that's going to get all pushed at once. Now here, we only have one file, so I'm actually going to commit and push. So I'm going to do this commit and push. Now, the very first time, it wants to know who you are. And the reason is, within our version control system, Bitbucket, you actually have the ability to track what users made what changes. So I'm just going to put in my last name. And I'm going to use my email. Now technically this could be any information. I'm just using, the best information that I can to help other people know who made what change. So I'm going to commit and change. Okay, do you want... Yep. Then I'm going to do a push. Okay, so I committed files. Push was successful. So if I come back over to my Bitbucket, and if I look at my source, my commit. Okay, so I see I had a commit. Now if I look at my source, I can see that my files are here. So if I had a whole website, all the files for the website would be underneath the source. Every time I make a change, that gets added in as well. So I'm going to just kind of make some comments here. All right. This is our PHP info file. So if I save that, okay, if I move off of it, it's blue. All right, so there's a couple different color schemes to kind of note. If I want to push this, I can commit the file, and then it gives me the same comment as last time. Typically, it's best to identify and leave really good messages, so that way you can help figure out what changes were made during which commit. All right, so I added a comment. All right, so, and if I just commit, that's not good enough. It needs to be a commit and push. And again, you can do them separate, but for right now, this is the easiest way of doing this. Okay, so if I come over here, I can now see that I've got 2 commits. All right, and if you click on the commit ID, you can actually see what was changed, so it highlights it. And if I go off of it, it's now not color-coded at all. So if I make another change, if I go off of it, I can see that it's blue. All right, so it just means that there's been non-committed changes. Okay, so underneath the version control, I can see that I've got my test here. I have the ability to commit here, and then I could say like a fixed bug. And then I can commit, but it's not up there yet. So I go back over to my bit bucket, it's not there. All right, so I actually have things queued up that need to be pushed. So I can actually go to my get, and then I can do a push. Oops. I want to push. And then I can see all of the things that need to be pushed. Now, this is the only one, so I can just do a push. Okay, so in my normal day-to-day work life, all right, if I was working on a team, the very first thing that I would do, I would come in and I would go to my get, and the very first thing I would do is a fetch. What a fetch does is it does a really quick check to say, hey, has anything changed since the last time I did work? Basically, what I'm doing is I'm saying, has any of my coworkers checked anything in? If they did, it'll identify that and let me know. All right, so it'll pop up a message. If something has changed, then what I do is I go back over to my version control, and I'll get a pull. I'll do a pull request. And then I'll do it. Now, nothing's changed, and my pull request is going to come back empty. But no items were pulled. All right. But if they did make changes, then that gets added into my local version. If I ever wanted to make a change, like let's say this file, I wanted to go back to how it was before. So this is my really lazy way of doing this thing. Well, I suppose I can go to my console. You can see, or the log, I'm sorry. you can see all the different stuff that was done. So the console is kind of a quick, easy way of being able to move around. So if I wanted to go here, I can revert back to this point. Like, oh my God, I made a big mistake. I want to just see. Now, I don't always go back. If it's a small thing and I just want to see like what was done, I can actually come out here to my commits. I can be like, okay, it was right before I fixed that bug. I can actually click on it and it's going to highlight like what I did, and then I can say, oh, this line was bad. So 9 out of 10 times, I actually, more than that probably, I actually will just check and see online what I changed, and then I'll go to the file, and then I'll just remove or I'll change whatever I did. It'll just help me figure it out, because normally if there's a bug, the bug's normally like a couple lines of code that for whatever reason I didn't check, or I just needed to do like a try parse or something. I'll fix it that way. All right, so that's the one way of doing it. If there was like a ton of code and I'm like, dude, I just need to go back to how it was before I did that because that was bad, then what I'll do is I'll come into the version control, and I could actually still copy and paste that code from that repository. So I could actually go to the commit, come over here, view the file at that time, and then I can save it and copy and paste it. That's normally what I do. But if you wanted to, you can come in here and you can revert. And then I'm going to accept theirs, all right? Because now mine's different than theirs, and I need to somehow either merge the two changes together, or like if I'm just rolling back, I'm just going to accept the way it was. So there is a merge as well. I'll talk about that. So at this point, I now rolled back to that very first time. So I reverted back, and then you can see that I've got to revert back. I committed that. Now I need to push that if I want it to be up on the server. So I'm going to go to my get, and then repository, and then I'm going to just do a push, and then I can see reverted back, and then I can push that. So that's kind of the flow, the workflow of how this works. Sometimes if me and a coworker are working on the same file, and all of a sudden I go to either do a push or I do a fetch, and I notice that they've changed something. My local copy is different than the remote copy. When I'm saying remote, I'm not talking about web server remote. I'm talking about the Bitbucket remote. At that point, you can do a merge, and you can look at it. What I normally do is I don't like magical merges. I need to know exactly what's happening. What I do is I'll copy my code, and then I'll put it like in Notepad or something. I'll accept their code, and then I will manually move my code into their code, and then I'll check it in. That's just the way I do it. It causes so many less issues than like having the machine automatically do it for me. But that's me, you know. So anyways, this is just a really quick crash course on version control and how to get version control working within PHP Storm. So as we're going through the semester, it's not a bad idea to add files. All right, so if it's red, like if I add a new file, let's just say I'm just going to create a new PHP file, and I'm just going to call it demo CVS. It's going to add, do you want to add this in? Now, make it easy. All right, just remember and don't ask again. So it'll automatically add that in. So it's now green, but it did not push it. All right, so So if I go over here and look at my source, it's not there. It's not going to automatically push it. So what you're going to want to do every so often is just make sure you go to get and then you commit. And then remember to push, commit and push. And then that way all of your files will be here. So after the semester ends, it's kind of nice to be able to have everything you've worked on. If you're always using Bitbucket, this is your files. They're in your location. After the semester ends, this web server is going to go away. Your local files are going to go away. All that stuff goes away. You would have backed it all up into version control. So anyways, hopefully you found this video helpful.